Welcome everyone. This song, we didn't start the fire because sometimes it looks like the news or fake news can polarize and can start fire, right? What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation, and thanks everyone for being here. To answer your question, Tocayo, I'm not sure we didn't start the fire. I'm sure we provided some gas to that fire, and I think the conversation around information platforms, news media in general, provides some of that gas that lights that fire of polarization and confrontation and the sort of divisions we've seen not just in Mexico, in the US, where I've covered politics for the last 20 years as well. So we can dig into that
So credibility and trust needs to be aligned with journalism, right? Information. Yesterday, Maciar Minobi from Eurasia was talking about how this new generation, in the past generations, Enrique, the source of news for maybe a previous generation, it was basically one or two. I mean, your newspaper, your TV show, your favorite channel, and that was your trusted channel of information. Right now, in average, maybe you can receive information from 100 different channels. So how can you build credibility now on media?
That's a great question. I often get that version of a question in many ways. People come up to me and ask me, how do you stay up to date in the news? What does your news consumption look like on any given day? And I wouldn't recommend my news consumption or my news diet to anyone on a given day if they want to keep mental health. But I would say that I take an approach to information as I do to food.
Yeah.
You've heard me talk about this in the past. I think we really need to understand that the information we're consuming is creating an emotional response, not just a thought reaction, but an emotional response. And that's where we need to draw a line as consumers and say, why is this asking me to be angry or to have an emotional reaction to the content, instead of asking me to have a rational, a thought process, instead of that emotional reaction. I don't like the term news media. I often use it as anyone else does, and I don't like it because it's many things grouped into one. And the media is not a monolithic. It's a guy on YouTube saying whatever he wants to say without any accountability, any sort of verification, or any way for us to really fact check or verify that information, even if that person lies or just accelerates conspiracy theories or propaganda. He's not accountable for it. If I go on air tonight on Televisa at 10:30 and I just say a bunch of lies and dig into conspiracy theories, and I'm accountable for that.
Yeah.
It's not just my credibility, but the credibility of the entire team and the entire company. So I think, first of all, we need to understand what the news media or just media is. It's a lot of things, different things, and different levels of quality and rigor for each one. In a fractured environment where audiences are going to other platforms to get their news and information, some platforms have chosen to go for that emotional response, to add to polarization, to try to get you to think that, this is your echo chamber, and whatever you think it's right, whatever the other person thinks is wrong, and we should dehumanize that, and we should criminalize that and think they are the enemy. There's no space for dialogue. And when we have these conversations about the erosion of democracy around the world, and we think of specific actors. If you're a Democrat in the US, you probably think that Trump is a threat to democracy, and you have your arguments for it. I'm not going to go into it. If you are a Trump supporter, you probably think Kamala Harris is a threat to democracy. Here in Mexico, if you are in the opposition, you probably think that Andrés Manuel López Obrador or even Claudia Sheinbaum represent a threat to democracy, right? And when the conversation becomes existential, there's no margin for dialogue, no margin to recognize different points of view, and that's the real imminent threat to democracy. Not the actors, but the fact that as a society, we have started to cancel any possibility of finding common space, finding common ground, even a common facts. And
do you believe the media have a role on that? I mean,
yes,
to engage in a better discussion, to engage in a better dialogue, or the media just need to present the facts, the truth, and that's it?
Well, I anchor a newscast where I don't do any opinion, so I do think that there's platforms that should do straight news. I have my own inclinations and my prejudice. I just approach it with intellectual honesty. People say, well, you have to approach it with objectivity. Objectivity doesn't exist. Let's just get rid of that myth. It's not a human quality. It's impossible for me to go into any specific issue and say, well, I don't have a previous experience or a limited amount of knowledge about this specific thing. So I approach it with intellectual honesty, which means I recognize my bias. I know where my experience comes from. I know how little I know about this, or maybe a lot about it. But then I'm willing to go through the process of reporting, verifying, contrasting points of view, and then getting a sort of closer version to the truth. I think that's the exercise. So when you ask me, can the media do a better job of trying to de-escalate this polarization, this confrontation, I say absolutely. But are consumers looking for that? I would say, no. Not really. I think the type of journalism that I do is sort of a species en peligro de extinción.
Yeah.
Because the loudest voice gets the more attention.
Yeah.
And like, again, going back to food, it's hard to make healthy choices every day about the food we eat, about how we take care of our bodies, about how we go about our days. It's easier to just sort of, I don't have time, I'll grab a burger or Chipotle or whatever.
And information is...
information is the same. Now that it's so readily available to us right in our hands, and we can consume information and share information so easily, people are not making the responsible choice of consuming the information that they know it's credible, it's coming from a source that looks for quality and rigor, and that it's not asking you to be angry or have an emotional response every single time. Do that exercise today. While you look at information or whatever you consume, you'll find yourself within a few minutes sort of reacting angry to the content. Feeling your stomach is guiding your information diet instead of, I'm old enough to remember how it felt like to sit down and read a newspaper article and come out of it saying, I actually learned something about this issue today. And it doesn't have to be a newspaper. It can be on your phone or your tablet or whatever, but even the process of spending 5-7 minutes reading something has become really difficult. And we've seen that in
the average of time spending in one note? It's seconds, not.
It depends on the demographic.
Yeah.
But 18 to 35, they would spend less than 2 minutes. It's basically the headline and the first paragraph, and that's all they read. So it's a challenge.
I want to return to the U.S.-Mexico relationship and through your experience, but let me ask you first, how do you see AI or technology improving or not that consumption of information. But it looks like for that particular niche, let's say 18 to 30 years old, the model or the algorithm is that if you read something for 20 minutes, for 20 seconds or more, it will feed you with more of the same, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be harder to bring someone to the middle or to that de-escalation.
Yeah, well, I mean, now that you mentioned algorithms and social media and instant messaging platforms, I think our kids, I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, I think they're going to see our media, social media consumption as we see cigarette consumption nowadays.
Okay.
Like, how could you smoke
Why?
all day on airplanes, in the office, on elevators, in public spaces? Like, that's crazy. Our kids are going to grow up and say, how could you share all that, personal and identity online for people to just take care of it and make millions with that? So I think actually I wish I had a smarter answer, a more intelligent answer, but it's about the promise and the peril of technology. The perils of technology, especially this technology, artificial intelligence, in the space of information and news, are evident. We are already seeing them with deep fakes. Every week, I have to go online and post something saying, I'm not the guy asking you to bring your savings from your 401k into this project, because there's a video of me, like, I showed it to my wife and she's like, why are you doing that? I'm like, it's not me. It's a deep
really?
fake. Yes. I mean, and there's a version
And a
of
good
it.
one?
He's actually better than me at anchoring, to be honest. But there's a version of me asking people to invest in something that Carlos Slim created, and then there's another version of me asking them to vote for this or this other candidate, and I'm sitting in the studio, and it's my voice, and it's my face, and
And can you do something?
nothing. I mean, we work with the platforms, but the platforms incentivize some of this content and help disseminate it. So that's the peril of artificial intelligence, and it's evident, and it's making it harder even for those of us who want to be better at noticing the difference between fact and fiction. I'm sure you've all had that experience. It's becoming harder to do that. Yeah. We get a press release saying something, and we need to go through 5 different layers of verification just to make sure it's coming from the place that it says it's coming from. It used to be that we get a press release from Sedena, and we knew it was coming from Sedena. I mean, we have direct channels of communication, that helps. But still, even a video of a head of state saying something, it needs to go through several layers of verification. And we do it. But 90% of the people you follow on Twitter don't. They just post a video right away.
Yeah.
And then the reaction is incredible, because what I get is, oh, you're being censored. Oh, of course. Yeah, Televisa. You guys don't publish anything, right? And we're like, well, it's fake. And we are verifying it. And we are actually doing the work it requires to make sure that you get the version that it's true.
Yeah.
And then the journalist or the outlet that printed the fake, they just erase it without any explanation or sort of any apology to their audience, and nothing. And it's a little frustrating, but at the end of the day, that's our job. And I think it's sort of like glaciers moving, right, in the Arctic. It's very slow, but I think at the end, it will make a difference. I think at the end, technology will also provide some of the answers and the solutions we need. It'll make our process much more efficient. Yeah. It'll threaten jobs, absolutely. Right now, I have, for the newscast every night, around 30 editors working on editing stations for the newscast. There's now artificial intelligence software that could do what they do in less than 5 minutes. and that's a workforce of 30 people.
Wow.
And that's already available tomorrow. So it's going to be a challenge.
Let's go back to your experience. You spent 10, 12 years in the US, in
15 years in the US.
15 years in the US.
Still, because now we're a
Yours-
binational company, Televisa Univision.
Televisa Univision.
Yes.
But you're now based in Mexico. You returned a year ago.
Yes.
So let me ask you about what's the perception in the U.S. about Mexico? Do you think that's fair through the lenses of the news, and vice versa? Now that you're in Mexico, the perception in Mexico about the U.S. through the lenses of the media.
Wow, that's a great question.
And if you can include Canada, I mean, I
Of course. Well, I think it's like most of what we've experienced based on stereotypes. I really want to try to remember that quote from an essay wrote by Octavio Paz in the New Yorker several years, decades ago, about sort of the misconceptions and the historic mistrust between our nations. That explains it much better than I could ever could. But I think in the end, media is a mirror of some of the worst stereotypes that we see.
the worst.
The worst. I would go on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox News when I was in the US to talk about immigration. And very early on, I noticed that it wasn't about us having a real conversation based on substance or facts or different points of view. It was a show. It was Dancing with the Stars. It was The Mask. And he was the host, and he was going to try to make me dance, which, by the way, I can't. And he would make fun of the fact that I remember one time Attorney General Sessions went to a Mexican restaurant, and the people at the restaurant didn't want to serve him. And they said, this is so offensive, and how could something like this happen in a free country like the US? And like, well, if you spend your entire political life and every time you go on media, you criminalize and you dehumanize these people, and you always have a negative view of their culture and their identity, how can you expect them to be kind and generous to you? I mean, be thankful that they didn't kick you out. At least they didn't want to serve you. And it started a conversation about where tacos are from. And he was saying, well, I'm from San Diego and tacos are from San Diego. I said, like, that's the last time I'll go on Fox News. Like, this is where I draw a line. This is getting ridiculous. So I would like to say we're trying to present our better versions. And here in Mexico, we just interviewed first Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady. And we did it in Colonia Roma, and we sat down.
That was yesterday?
That was on Monday. And we had Chef Elena Reigadas cook a meal for us in this beautiful restaurant, the best chef in the world, according to different organizations that are dedicated to that sort of thing. And this talented woman, incredibly kind, that has been so successful, presenting some of the best of who we are as Mexicans in this beautiful place. I thought that was the right setting for us to have that conversation with Jill Biden and present that on Univision in the US. We're having a town hall with President Trump on Tuesday and with Vice President Harris on Thursday on Univision. The conversation with President Trump is in Miami.
This is your second conversation with President Trump, right?
It'll be my second interview with President Trump. This is a town hall, so it won't be an interview format. The audience will be asking the questions. But imagine the importance that Televisa Univision has both candidates just a month away from the election. We'll probably won't have another debate in the U.S.
Is this the first time an Hispanic media do a town hall with a...
Second time. We had President Obama and Mitt Romney back in that, 2012 election?
2012.
Now, but I think with the stakes and with everything that's been happening, the fact that Televisa Univision can host President Trump and Vice President Harris the same week, just a month away from the election, is very significant. In Miami and in Vegas, Florida is not a swing state. Of course, now it's a solid red state, but Nevada is, and I think it's going to be interesting to have that conversation. So we want to present audience members with the opportunity to ask questions. And when we were working with groups, focus groups, and companies that were deciding who the audience will be, we wanted to show not just the stereotype of what migrants or Latinos are in the US, but CEOs and scientists and people who are in the armed forces, and sort of a more authentic image of what Latinos represent and why they're so essential to the US. The same here in Mexico, I think, right? Yeah. The stereotypes about the gringo and, you know, it's someone who looks at us with sort of this dismay and mistrust. And I think that's changed. I think forums like this one have come a long way in changing that perception as well. And we need to keep having those conversations. We need to get closer to Canada, which geographically and culturally seems a little bit farther away than the US. And I think we're making progress in that sense.
Yeah. I recently saw a poll on the Hispanos in the US, and polls are tricky, right? And I want your opinion on that. But it was like 58-42 now. Do you think that's reality? What the polls show right now about the Hispano vote in the U.S.
I learned early on, as a parent, that taking the temperature of your kids, you know, whether you put the thermometer and it says, well, maybe it's a fever, maybe it's not. It's sort of right in the middle. What should you do? Should you give them the Motrin? No. My wife's like, no, we don't use medicines anymore. We have to do it another way. What I'm trying to say is, it only takes the temperature. It doesn't say anything about the patient. Polls are a good way to measure the temperature of the race, especially in the U.S. 7 out of the last 8 elections, presidential elections in the U.S., have been won by Democrats. In the popular vote, in the total vote, 7 of the last 8.
Wow.
The question here is, where are those votes located? And we've all heard about the swing states. They say it's 7. I think it's going to come down to 3, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and either Nevada or Arizona. It's not that Wisconsin or Michigan or North Carolina, especially North Carolina, after this terrible Hurricane Helen, are not going to be important. Of course they are. But I think the decision will come down to that. What does that mean? In my view, it means that we're going to have an incredibly close election again.
Based on your conversations with President Trump and Kamala Harris and other members of their teams, what could be your forecast on the relationship between U.S. and North America, Canada, Mexico, in the context of, you know, China trade war and Russia and what is happening? You mentioned Israel. So in that context,
I mean, it should be a no-brainer. I think there's no one in this room, of course, this room, but there's no one either in the US, Mexico, or Canada that's not a politician or like a true follower of a politician that doesn't see the benefit of creating this regional bloc at a time where the world is more uncertain, more unstable. We have this incredible opportunity of having everything we need in this region, of working together to, you know, energy independence, economic development, food security, you know, an immigration system that creates the right incentives for people to move around our countries. I think it's a no-brainer, but when I look at the actual rhetoric, the dominant narrative, and I heard a few days ago Kamala Harris sort of coming out and saying, you know, I voted against USMCA. Like those fringe views and positions. I mean, Democrats have always been sort of hawkish on trade.
Yeah, Obama was
Right.
same thing.
Because of unions, there are many reasons. But what I'm trying to say is that the positions that were sort of in the margin just 10 years ago have become more mainstream. And they're not mainstream in the sense that we would have liked to see them. Talking about regional integration and really working together. Security. Why is it so difficult for us to work together in security if we know we are pivotal, the US, Mexico, Canada, to each other's security, to regional security? So I think, unfortunately, the trend is not positive in that sense. And it's one of those things where it gets frustrating to see that it's a low-hanging fruit. It's right there for us to grab it. But the sort of political currents that are, to be also honest, based on real public sentiment also, right? There are these demographic anxieties that they call them, this economic frustration. And I understand that, but I think each country needs to do a better job of explaining public opinion why it's in the best interest of the US economy, the Mexican economy, the Canadian economy, to work together, and the people from our three nations to really strive for that integration.
Enrique, I see the 2026 as a huge opportunity to build that narrative and to present those arguments. You have the USMCA review on the one hand, and you have the World Cup in the other. So, I mean, the spotlight will be there. And the spotlight is always a good opportunity to present the right story. But, and let's end up with that question. How to be better? I mean, this group, this crowd, the private sector, the think tanks, the research centers, the universities, the entrepreneurs, the investors, how can we build a better narrative? Because it looks like, bad news always takes more attention.
Yeah, I always like to look at these questions. I don't know if you've ever seen that illustration of progress on a ladder with very small steps, and then progress on a ladder with very large steps, like big goals, right? And of course, in little time, the person on the ladder with the little steps has made so much more progress than the guy who's trying to even grab the first step and can't do it, right? Still on the ground. What I'm trying to say by that, I think it's, first of all, a local effort. It starts with cities and municipalities. It starts with companies. It starts with conversations like this to get things to move forward, to get the right inertia, right? The sort of movement we need for public officials, for the big decisions to follow. So I would say we have the Bloomberg City Forum coming to Mexico City soon, which is basically built around that idea. The Aspen Institute built it around that idea. And I think, so local is crucial at a city level, that sort of cooperation. We've seen it with environmental issues, how important it is to tackle climate change, which is this huge global challenge. The first step is to work on a local municipality level. So first of all, I would say that. Second of all, I think, and this is not me trying to sort of put a star on my forehead. I think that a more regional approach to news and information is important. You've never seen El Noticiero here in Mexico talking about the US election more than we have in the last 6 months. You've never seen the anchor of the Mexican Noticiero interviewing Trump and Harris or President Biden. I couldn't believe that it was the first time. I mean, before me, it was Saludowski and Lopez Doriga and Denise Merker. It's been on for 55 years. And we've never interviewed the President of the United States. There was an exchange, I think, with Jimmy Carter at some point over the phone.
Wow.
But that was the only thing. Because I said, and it's not about me doing it. It's about the recognition in the US that audiences here are important. That's the only reason why I was giving the interview. That doesn't have anything to do with me. It's they're recognizing that Latino voters are important. They're recognizing that having a regional conversation about these issues are important. That the President of the United States to sit down with us and talk about immigration and security and foreign policy and jobs and education, it's not just a conversation about US voters. And I think it's important that we've recognized that as a company. I've taken on a role that allows me to do more there and also bring audiences from Mexico to that other side and try to reach the gap, the divide between, you've seen it, there's a lot of misunderstanding about who we are, and by we, I mean Mexican Americans. I was born between these two realities. I'm bicultural, binational. I don't fit there. And then sometimes I feel like I don't fit here either because I lived so long in the US since I was young and came back. And no soy mexicano suficiente a veces, ¿no? Y no soy, I'm not American enough. The truth is, I think I've learned that these cultures, these two cultures, hopefully these three cultures can borrow from each other, learn from each other, and lift each other up. And I'll leave you with that.
We need to have another session just to talk about the border region. You spend a lot of time in the border region, and I unfortunately, I'm from the border, and unfortunately, I think there is, if there is misperception about Mexico, about the border, and that includes the U.S. side, not only the Mexican side. There's a huge misperception. But Enrique, thank you so much for the work you are doing.
Thank you.
As a journalist, and thank you for your time here.
We'll do it from Piedras Negras next time.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.